ManListening presents What She Said and What I Heard, How One Man Shut Up and Started Listening by Stuart Watson.
Preface. Stop talking, you're wrong. Therapist's name withheld at her request. Charlotte, North Carolina, 2018. On listening. After I made a crude comment, a woman at work slapped me hard across the face. In the midst of my ranting, my therapist cut me off. Stop talking, you're wrong. My wife told me point blank, sweetheart, you are not an empathic listener. 3 women over the span of 30 years taught me important lessons. The only question is whether I would learn or keep doing the same stupid man stuff, insisting I was right. Frequently wrong, but never in doubt, my male ego wants to do 3 things. 1, look good. 2, be right. 3, keep control. The closer I get to the truth of how my ego acts, I 1, look bad. 2, am wrong. 3, lose control. As long as I keep talking over these women, I learn nothing. As long as I dig in, double down, and defend the indefensible, I get nowhere. Whenever I'm closed off or shut down, I stay stuck. If I'm arguing, I'm losing. The behavior is its own punishment. Depending on how far I'm willing to go, I could end up all alone, my willful ignorance imposing its own suffering, solitary confinement brought on entirely by self. I imprison me. I could lose the respect of my daughters because of some careless comment. I could be cut off from my wife because I refuse to acknowledge my part in turning a simple disagreement into a heated argument. My colleagues could turn their backs because I don't take their complaints about my boorish behavior seriously. The past few years in our culture have brought with them a long litany of men whose fundamental contempt for girls and women is made plain. I don't know anything about those men. I have a full plate answering for my own words and deeds. I offer no excuses, only lessons, the occasional hard-won insight. I'd much rather write a book, produce a podcast, and make films and speeches about how I got the money, the girl, and the CEO gig. I'd love to write only about success, #winning. This is mostly a different story, the recitation of ugly failures. Sorry. Seems to be the only way I learn. Truth be told, I only had money because I was blessed with generous parents who adopted me. I never got the girl. I married a strong woman. I fell totally in love with her through wild fate. We're still married decades later because we work really hard at it. At work, I never made it to a C-level suite. On the contrary, I was told to clean out my little cubicle one Friday and not to come back. I sued them, we settled, I'll never go back. This is the great gift of my experience. If I become willing to look bad, be wrong, and let go of the need to control my story, huge lessons await me. My peaceful life on the other side of those lessons is its own reward. Making my mother cry. What kind of a girl gives away her baby? Helen Brett Schmid, birth mother, Emanuel County, Georgia, summer 1958, recounted 2015. On shame. She was standing in her kitchen with a tissue. We'd taken a break from filming her interview when she said it. I made my mother cry. What kind of a girl gives away her baby? That baby was me. I felt kind of shitty I'd made an old woman cry and frustrated that it wasn't on camera. Because I'm a monster, okay? It was 1958 when she got pregnant with me. Her father and the Baptist preacher did what men did back then. They shamed her, and then they cooked up a scheme for her to get rid of it. Me, it, whatever. The scheme involved shunning this poor woman, a hopelessly naive 22-year-old, no longer a girl and barely a woman. The 2 men sent her to a boarding house in Macon, Georgia. There she would tend to old folks to earn her keep. She'd stay out of sight while she got big enough to call attention to herself. At nursing school, they said she was at home. At home, they said she was away at school. Nobody compared stories. Turned out, their scheme was quite the rage at the time. It was called adoption. The Georgia Department of Public Welfare was in on the deal. I've got the paperwork. I started life as a little white welfare baby, a ward of the state sent to a foster home with a passel of other kids. Some magazine writer hung a name on this era, called it the baby scoop. I have struggled to come up with my own words for what happened to mother and child. I have settled on the word amputation. The mother grows old, toting the phantom body of an infant in her gut, and the child grows up with the invisible scar from learning that its mother loved it so much that she cut it off and gave it away. But that's all my stuff. We're told Mother Mary kept all these things in her heart. My mother shoved the shame way deep down, where she'd never have to think about it, and it stuck. Buddy, you won't believe how it stuck. When I contacted her 45 years later, let's just say I was a mixed blessing. What kind of a girl gives away her baby? Well, white girls mainly during this era. It was just economics, the law of supply and demand. Black families kept the children of single mothers tucked away within the family with grandma or auntie. Infertile couples wanted children that looked like them, hair, skin tone, shape, the whole bit. They did not want children who did not look like them. This was true of couples of any race, but many white couples had the money to buy Barbie and Ken. When the boys came home from war, some of them couldn't conceive. Their mothers and wives in their new crackerbox houses kept asking about kids. Meanwhile, across the country, some other clueless couple was fogging up windows. America had not yet begun to look to places like Korea, Romania, Guatemala, and Sudan for a UN family. The age of first consent had dropped, and so did 1 million or so babies. I'm 1 in 1 million. Thus, the institution of adoption changed. I can't say it was born. It's more like this big church and state-backed adoption scheme was adopted. My mother's lifelong shame was not really about me at all. It wasn't about being caught having sex outside marriage or even the stigma of illegitimacy. I was a little bastard long before I became a big one. No, my mother's shame was that she disappointed her father. My mother loved me enough to tell me her truth. She was the good girl, the firstborn of 6, the favorite, who fell from grace. She fell hard. When her father found out about her pregnancy, his blood pressure spiked so high he was almost hospitalized. As we say in the South, he nib out had a stroke. He was trapped between impossible choices that he made for her, keeping the child and enduring unending shame, or losing his firstborn grandchild. He picked the latter. She went along. Lintorn Anthony Brett was a self-made farmer who pulled cypress from the Georgia swamps, stumps from the fields, and crops from the land. He took the whole family to a little white church in the country every time the doors opened. Family dinner, church, holiday gatherings, all Bretts were present and accounted for. This was non-negotiable. Nobody took a pass and sulked in their room. He'd whip your ass. To hear my mother and her family tell it, family meant the world to Dada Brett. But faith came even before family and farming, so he arranged for her to give me up. My maternal grandfather drove to Macon and picked up his daughter the day after I was born. She was alone. He met her in front of the hospital and helped her into the truck. Then he said words she'd never forget. I guess I'll never meet my oldest grandson. He never did. When she sheds tears now, it's not for her, nor for me. I'll just tell you what she said. Broke his heart. Watch, listen, and learn. To hear Helen tell her own story, visit ManListening.com to view a video. Giving birth. Oh, honey, you don't have the power. Helen Brett Schmid, birth mother, Macon, Georgia, April 8, 1959, recounted 2004. On forgiveness. My birth mother gave me up for adoption on the day I was born. She never held me or nursed me or laid me on her heart. The nurses weren't supposed to tell her my sex. One of them slipped up and said something to the effect of, "No wonder she was in labor so long. He's such a big boy." That nurse was reprimanded. Of course, I always wondered what happened to my mother, how exactly I came about, who my people were, I really kind of gave up hope of ever knowing. But then I became an investigative reporter by trade and had 4 kids of my own. I survived trying to slowly kill myself with vodka, which is possible, but I do not recommend it. It takes way too long. Once I sobered up for a decade, I wrote to the state of Georgia to formally ask for what is called non-identifying information. That means some poor social worker, a woman of course, had to paw through a bunch of secret records to type up a fuzzy report about the circumstances of my conception, delivery, and handover to the state. No names, no places, nothing to allow a snoopy reporter to put 2 and 2 together and come knocking. God, no. This particular social worker slipped up like the delivery nurse. She typed 8 single-spaced pages. Plus, she sent a few documents with names and locations, mostly covered up. Mostly. It was enough. I put 2 and 2 together and found my mother. I wrote her a letter in my own block scribble. It began, "Dear Helen." She wrote me back in some sappy greeting cards, said I should call. There was too much to write. I was a 45-year-old man when I first met my mother. We settled on the Augusta Regional Airport as the setting for our first face-to-face meeting, not because either of us flew, but because it was a convenient landmark between me in the big city of Charlotte, North Carolina, and her in tiny Kite, Georgia. I drove my canary yellow Mini Cooper with a black roof. She drove an old white Dodge Caravan. There were no cameras present to record the event. No background music, no slow-mo build-up, but the friendship that began that day with swapping photos and stories in an airport lobby is a singular highlight on the game film of my life. It began the healing of generations of wounds. We went to lunch at a nice place in an old house in North Augusta, across the Savannah River. I said something I'd always wanted to say. "I forgive you," I said. She just laughed. "Oh, honey," she said, "you don't have the power to do that." I imagined myself the hero of my own story, the brave investigative reporter who solves the mystery of his own identity, finding his mother after all those years, and promptly proceeding to heal lifetimes of shame with 3 words. With no shortage of hubris, I conceived of little old me as the originator of forgiveness, the healer, the master, the fixer. My mother did what mothers do. She put me in my place. She taught a middle-aged son an unexpected lesson. Alone in a hostile universe, humans lack the capacity to forgive. I can't form even one side of that equation. I can't offer forgiveness, let alone heal her heart. I did not conceive me, not as superhero and not as wailing child. She and my father, a drunk like me, conceived me. And even then, weren't they just the blind agents of some nebulous purpose, of a power beyond our ability to understand? I cannot conceive of the shame of a single young Southern woman who missed her period in the hot summer of 1958, the pure terror of that. No man knows the trouble she's seen. Women do. My father was not in heaven. My father was on the next plane smoking out of Atlanta. That woman lost her firstborn, brought to term and handed over sight unseen. She lost her husband of vodka and the invisible wounds of war, a casualty after the fact. Then, as an old woman just last year, she found her only daughter, my sister, dead on her bedspread. At this point, I could understand it if my mother lacked all faith in a benevolent universe. In my book, she gets a pass. Go directly to heaven, old woman. You have suffered enough. Yet somehow she still has faith. I'm not sure I do, but I think she's been forgiven, and I didn't do it. Batman, Jesus, and Louise Dukes. Name unknown, Babysitter, Albany, Georgia, August 1959. Recounted 2020. On Grace. Weed was never much my thing. I just loved to drink. But one day freshman year, I did a bunch of bong hits, got pretty baked, and saw a vision. It was a group of 3 round-faced black women looking down at me as though I were an infant, their hair wrapped tightly near the scalp and backlit by a bright light. so I couldn't quite make out their faces. In my mental state, I took this to mean my mother was black, and to my mind, black means many things, and they're all interesting. So I was kind of excited at the prospect of being biracial, or maybe I was just looking for a way to erase white guilt. Ever what it was, when my DNA results came back, imagine my disappointment at being the whitest man in America. We're talking mayo and marshmallow on white bread. We're talking Casper the Friendly Ghost white. We're talking Pat Boone minus Speedy Gonzales. Not Aryan so much as pasty Anglo. Boring. Then one day I found this black and white snapshot of a black woman in a white maid's dress. She's sitting in a chair I recognize from our living room in my parents' home at 1226 Hilltop Drive in Albany, Georgia. Pronounced Albany, not like the capital of New York. She is alone, no other round-faced women in the picture. Her hair is not wrapped, and there is no bright light. The back of the photo is dated August 1959, the same month a welfare department social worker in Macon handed me over to my mom and dad. I was 4 months old, fat, and fresh out of foster care. I've asked around a little bit among Mom's living friends to see who this caregiver was. No answers so far. I promise you that I'm not done looking. The novel coronavirus COVID-19 stalks Albany, Georgia as I write, but as soon as the coast is clear, I'll resume pursuing leads on the ground. Unlike my best friend's mom, Catherine Stevenson, a.k.a. Snooky Butt, and her other contemporaries, my mom couldn't seem to settle on one maid/babysitter for much longer than a few years. There was Louise Dukes, who got her nursing license and moved to Washington, D.C., where I heard her son Tony became a cop. There was Cilla May, who dipped fingers full of rainbow sweet snuff inside her lip and hit the back screen door to spit a long brown stream into the boxwood, scattering the cats sleeping in the pine straw beneath. And I remember Robbie, who pretended to discipline us by chasing my sister and me around the house with a leather belt, all of us laughing so hard we bent double. Among her prized photos and letters, my mom intentionally left us a pair of typewritten instructions to sitters for our care. In one letter, Mom addressed our overnight sitter, who was white. In another, she spoke to Ms. Dukes, the daytime maid and childcare provider, who was black. My mom and dad were taking a rare and exotic long weekend jaunt to Bermuda. In the note were times, dates, menus, recipes, locations, worst-case scenarios, and lists of phone numbers for every imagined emergency. Depending on your disposition, you could see the notes as obsessive or endearing. A whole universe exists in that pair of documents. It is a cultural artifact articulating a world long gone, where one woman addresses another woman and then a third, speaking volumes about race and social strata and relationship. It's really a whole nother long story. My wife Lorraine and I took a number of long weekends to New York, and the 20 years or so we had small kids at home. Other than a few phone numbers, I don't think either of us left so much as a thank you note, let alone typewritten pages, with a home telephone number for a pediatrician. 2 things struck me from Mom's notes. 1, she said I could stay up past 8 p.m. to watch Batman. Yes! 2, Mom instructed the nighttime sitter to hear the children's prayers. So all jacked up on Caped Crusader, I kneeled at my bedside and mumbled, "Now I lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep," as someone kept watch. First Batman, then Jesus, then finally Babysitter. Lost in all this, who were these caregivers, these black women holding little white children, mothering them? Didn't they have kids of their own? What happened to their own kids? What did their kids have for dinner? Who cooked for them? Were they watching Batman, saying their prayers alone? Who heard them? And how did these women regard this pudgy little white boy eating second helpings of spaghetti with the sauce from his mom's recipe, the one with the ground beef from the A&P? Was I just a paltry side hustle for these women, or did they develop a genuine affection for me? What do I owe them? How do I ever thank them, repay them for their many kindnesses? Had they chopped me into tiny bits and made rich red spaghetti sauce out of my fatty flesh, placing me in Tupperware in the freezer, you would probably know their names. But they didn't, of course, so I have snatches of memories uniformly warm, some jumbled and fuzzy from too many hits on the old bong. I read somewhere about a study about regular interaction with people we might dismiss as bit players in our lives. The dry cleaner, the waitress, the receptionist. The study found that when these people go away, replaced by the new girl or the new machine, we take an outsized hit of loneliness and disconnection. Whether we wish to acknowledge it or not, we rely on these daily doses of basic human decency. Nowadays, there is such a thing as using one's voice for a straight-up transaction, such as compelling a machine to play a song or flip a switch. And then there are human relationships, which involve flesh and blood. True, many a human relationship is defined by money or class or caste, circumscribed by the false and fleeting values of this world, but they are nonetheless human. And finally, there is the singular story of transaction and relationship between white men and black women in the American South, a tortured history unique in the millennia of Homo sapiens. I have no answers for that, only questions. At the time of this story, I was a fat little boy living in a white bubble. I don't know if Jesus heard me say grace over a plate of mom's spaghetti, but I'm grateful Louise Dukes did.
We hope you have enjoyed what she said and what I heard, How One Man Shut Up and Started Listening, by Stuart Watson. To find links to video interviews and podcast episodes referenced in this recording, please visit ManListening.com. That's ManListening, one word, no spaces. You can talk back to Stuart on most social media at ManListening. Thanks for listening. ManListening is a production of Unmediated LLC in cooperation with the Queen City Podcast Network and Balto Creative Media. Allison Andrews at Andrews Creative and Rachel Clapp-Miller are developmental producers. Sally Higgins at Higgins & Owens tries to keep us legal. Our music is A Day at the Park by the group Pictures of the Floating World. Your announcer is Catherine Smith. That's me. Please go to our Patreon page. You'll find us at patreon.com. Look for ManListening, one word, no spaces. We hope you'll join us by becoming a member. A small investment can raise up the conversation. If you want exclusive member merch like a t-shirt, we can arrange that too. Don't forget to support us at Patreon. We believe one voice can change the conversation.